was also the first forerunner for the map editor that would later become part of StarCraft and Warcraft and our games moving forward.
That's kind of our first move of taking sort of PC-style artwork and bringing it more into the Blizzard art style, where it's a little bit more cartoony, it's a little bit more accessible to the console market.
It went on to win Puzzle Game of the Year in the same year that Rock and Roll Racing won Racing Game of the Year. And so our tiny little company with about 20 employees won 2, I think, of the top 7 awards that year. Keeping in mind we were competing against companies like Sega and Nintendo and Konami and Capcom. I think we may have been the only company to win 2 of the 7 top awards.
I was the lead programming guy on Blackthorn, which was one of the few games that we've done over the years that didn't actually have a multiplayer component to it.
It was inspired by a couple of cool games that at the time we thought were really fun, kind of blends between, puzzle games and shooters.
Blackthorn was actually our first rotoscope game. We actually took Frank Pierce out in the back alley and got him to jump over a bunch of wood and got him to run and climb ladders and things like that, and we'd videotape him. Then we'd come back in and we'd draw over him for the character.
It was a little bit dry and a little bit boring, so we ended up making it on some far-off planet, and for some reason this guy with the dirty t-shirt and jeans is a prince, and like all princes, they have shotguns.
It was a pretty quick development. I don't remember it taking very long.
When I think back on Blackthorn, the funny thing I think about it is that the 2 artists that were primarily responsible for creating the character art for Blackthorn both had long, stringy hair. And if you look at all the character art in Blackthorn, including the main character, they've got this long, stringy hair. And it's like, wow, these artists basically created this character art in their own image. And so I think we need more diversity among our artists working on any one project so that we get diversity in that character art.
I guess the other funny story to go along with that was we had to change the name in Europe from Blackthorn to Black Hawk. Blackthorn turns out to be a really popular brand of beer in Europe. So it'd be like, I guess, if we had named our product Budweiser.
In the early years, the company pretty much lived on royalties that we got from the games we worked on or the ports that we worked on. But there were times when there just wasn't enough money to pay salaries and stuff like that.
On paper, it always looked like we were just a couple months away from being completely in the black and having a windfall of excess cash to work with. And it never really happened.
Mike and I tried to shelter everybody from anything other than making the games.
We found out that you could actually get interest-free advances on your Discovery card by going to the supermarket and getting cash back.
They would go and they would cash in their credit cards at the local market and then put the money in the bank account so that they could still make payroll.
And although we never missed the payroll, it's really a miracle that we never missed a payroll because we were always a week away from being unable to make payroll.
And some people knew about this and some people didn't. But those of us that did, we know the kind of people these men are, and we knew then that we would work for these people forever.
And so it was a pretty lean couple of years early on, but amazingly still super, super fun.
The company sort of grew beyond the point where our Discover cards couldn't handle it anymore. So we each went to our parents and we got them to put each $20,000 into a bank account, so $40,000. And at the time that we sold the company to Davidson and Associates, we completely maxed out the $40,000 credit line. And so, yeah, I mean, it was pretty tight for the first few years.
So that was a period where we were transitioning from being a third-party developer where we would make products for other companies based on their ideas. The next step up was being sort of a joint developer where we would take our own concepts and pitch them like Lost Vikings. And then we decided we wanted to try self-publishing, and we had started with Warcraft. The idea there was that it would still be published by an established publisher who had distribution, but we would control the packaging, we would sort of control the marketing, and our name would go on the front of the box. In the middle of that process, Bob and Jan Davidson came along.
We became aware of Silicon and Synapse because we had a product called KidWorks, which needed to be transformed into Windows. They took on the project. They did it on budget, on time.
I heard about Silicon and Synapse when I started at Davidson & Associates, and interestingly enough, when I arrived, the first thing that I was asked to do was do contractual due diligence to acquire this little company that Davidson was looking at.
Our interest in buying them came because we had achieved a larger and larger market share of the educational software market, and a larger business, much larger, was the entertainment side of PC software.
One night, Bob just said to Alan, he goes, "How much do you want?" And Alan gave him an astronomical amount, and thinking that Bob would just go, "No way, that's way too much." And Bob said yes.
We were a public company at the time, I believe, and so we had the wherewithal to do that. But we didn't know if they had an interest in selling, but I guess Interplay made them an offer or approached them about acquiring more of them.
Interplay back in those days was the cream of the crop. They were an excellent company and had a lot of really, really good people.
We always thought, well, Interplay had a bit of an advantage because they were culturally aligned with the folks at Silicon and Synapse. On the other hand, we were adults. And one of the things they were looking for was adults to do the business side of the business.
They basically said, nothing has to change. You guys continue doing just what you're doing now. You guys are really good at making games. We're really good at educational software. We'll handle the sales and distribution for you, but nothing has to change. Keep doing what you're doing.
These guys are creative, and you can't control, creative talent. You've got to let it do what it's going to do. And I said, they're more than creative. They understand their consumers. They are their consumers. Finally, on a Friday, Alan called me and said, your company's really very attractive, but, we've been doing business with Interplay for quite a while, and we think we're going to go that direction. And Jan came in my office a little while later, and I said, well, the guys down at Silicon and Synapse have decided to go to Interplay. She said, really, can I talk to Alan? I said, be my guest. And she did. So I'll let her describe that conversation.
Well, I called him up and I said, you have made a big mistake. And he said, well, we've been sitting on the floor and we were thinking that we may have done the worst thing we've ever done to ourselves. And I said, you've made a big mistake and I want you to think about it some more.
The following Monday, Alan called me and he said, I've been thinking about what Jan has said all weekend and I didn't get a minute's sleep. And I'm thinking, that's pretty good. And so finally said, we really want adults, we really want the business acumen that we see with the folks at Davidson. He said, we're going to change our mind, we'll go with you.
They said that we would be able to completely retain our creative control over the games we were making, and that has managed to allow us to protect our autonomy all of these years. And I think we've got a setup that is totally unique in terms of divisions of larger organizations having this type of autonomy.
It wasn't hard for us to allow Blizzard to do its thing, but there was always a little caveat. As long as it was working, if it's not working, we may have to do something, but it always worked. There wasn't a time when it didn't work.
Well, I think any name change for our company was destined to be better than Silicon and Synapse.
At some point, Alan decided we need to change our name. So there was this sort of brainstorming effort, and we wound up with Chaos Studios,
which we felt was pretty representative of our development process, which I'm told is still pretty representative of our development process.
A lot of people thought it said Chouse or Chads.
And then we got a phone call from a company called Chaos Technologies. They're based out in Florida, and they basically said, hey, we have the name Chaos, but we're happy to let you continue using it, but it will cost you $100,000. And we said, ooh, okay, no thanks, we'll pick a different name.
One of the first things that happened after the acquisition was Alan calls and said, well, we had a big meeting and we don't like the name Chaos anymore. We want to change it.
So we were going through some other ideas, and then we had an idea for Ogre Studios.
Well, at the time, we were already part of Davidson & Associates, and when Alan presented the new name Ogre Studios to Jan Davidson, she hated it.
I said, that's interesting. Can I get back to you on that? So I had a little chat with Jan, and she had kind of an initial, you know, thump.
Thought that the name might be a little scary for the kids.
I called Alan back and I said, you know, I did promise you that you'd have your own independence, and this is kind of embarrassing, but this does seem to have some impact, according to Jan and our marketing folks, and they know better than I on our business.
So we ended up changing that name as well to something a little bit more friendly.